Good afternoon, Washington, D.C. Good afternoon. This is Tony Browder welcoming you to another edition of the Browder File Show. As always, I'm happy to be here, happy to have this opportunity to speak with you, share thoughts and ideas and interesting information. And yes, I'm here. I'm happy. I want to wish everyone a happy equinox. This past Monday was the fall equinox, which means that the Earth has tilted back on its axis. We are now moving in the northern hemisphere. We are now moving in another direction, tilting toward the sun or tilting away from the sun, which means that our days will get shorter, approximately 1 minute per day for the next 90 days until we reach the winter solstice, which is December 21st through the 24th. And during that period of time, during those 4 days, the Earth will begin to right itself on its axis and start tilting in the opposite direction. The winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. We have 3 days where the length of the time of day, or the length of the day, the length of daylight or nighttime remains the same for 4 days. And then after that, on the fifth day, the day begins to lengthen by 1 minute per day. And so it was said in ancient times, over 5,000 years ago, that on that date, the sun was born. That is, the days begin to get longer as a result of the sun now uh, making its a longer appearance in the northern hemisphere. So, as they said back in those days, thousands of years ago, that the sun was born on December the 25th. So as times changed, knowledge changed, and people began to interpret knowledge from the past differently, and they ascribe certain beliefs, concepts, and ideas to that knowledge. And people now ascribe to that day the birth of a different sun. But it's important to understand the role that the stars, the planets play in our lives. I'm speaking beyond the traditional interpretation of astrology, but really understanding how everything that transpires, everything that moves through the universe has an impact on everything else in the universe, has an impact on us here on planet Earth below. So, happy equinox, everyone. And you will notice the days will begin to get shorter by 1 minute per day. And as we move into this season of darkness, darkness is associated with death, darkness is associated with ignorance, darkness is associated with evil. There are those who also understand that darkness represents a time where people should begin to be still, begin to go inward, begin to spend more time just checking themselves out, processing what's going on in their minds, in their lives, in their hearts, and preparing for the birth of the sun on December the 25th, when the energy that's been generated, the thoughts that have been put out in the universe begin to manifest themselves. And you have the capacity now to reap the benefits of those thoughts that you put in motion during this time of darkness. Um, we're going to be talking about these concepts and ideas in future shows, but I just wanted to put that out there. I also would like to thank my guests from last week, Charles and Ellen Finch. We had a phenomenal interview. We talked about a number of things. The Nile Valley Conference, we talked about reincarnation. We talked about African spirituality and African health. It was a very stimulating conversation, and I appreciate everyone who called in to express their thanks for that discussion, everyone who sent emails and texts letting me know how much they enjoyed it. And something I want to bring to your attention, whenever I'm doing an interview here on the Browder File Show, and we have more information than we could cover in the allotted time, 1 hour, then what I do is open the door into the overflow room and we continue that conversation. Um, and that extended conversation is available on my YouTube channel. And so you can hear all of our shows, you can hear all of our interviews, plus the extended interviews in the overflow room on our YouTube channel. And all you would need to do is go to YouTube, type in the word Karak, Karakh, browser, and you will be able to access all 43 of those shows. So yeah, you have many different ways of checking in, and we extend this opportunity to all of you all to do so. So lots of things going on. I My guest for the hour has just joined us. I want to thank Brother Kalechi for just reaching out to me and checking in. He was going to be a pitch hitter if necessary, but my guest has just joined us for today's interview. And let me frame this. And Brother Kalechi, I know you're listening. So what I'd like for you to do is to call in at 5:50 so that you can share with our listeners information about the upcoming Founders Day activity this Sunday at the Thurgood Marshall Center for Appeal. So I'm going to extend an invitation to you, Brother Kletchy, to call in on air at 202-588-0893. And I'll give you some time to invite our audience to this year's Founders Day activities. So now that my guest is here and I can wipe the sweat from my brow, I don't have to pivot. I want to set up today's show by talking about the brain. Um, there's an accepted belief that the average person uses less than 10% of their brain. I never could understand that. I never could understand how anyone could be comfortable accepting the fact that they're using 10% of their capabilities. But we're going to talk about the brain today, different aspects of the brain, how we can get more out of it. And I want us to just understand what the brain is. The human brain weighs just 3 pounds, and it's only 2% of the average person's body weight. And scientists have been studying the brain for centuries, and yet they have no real clue, no real understanding as to how the brain really works. They know a lot about the physicality of the brain, but they don't understand all of its inner workings. They know, for example, that the brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. And these 86 billion neurons collectively form over 100 trillion synaptic connections. And that process, and these synapses process information instantly. These connections form memories. These connections process everything you see, everything you hear, everything that you touch. And the memories you form deeper trenches in your brain and allow you to remember events that happened 5 years ago or 50 years ago. All of that information, all of that knowledge is stored in the brain. And so neuroscientists at one time believed that the brain stopped making new neurons, these components within the brain that communicate with other components within the brain and allow you to exchange and store information. They believe that the brain's capacity to develop new neurons stopped at a certain age. And if a person, God forbid, had a stroke and portions of their brain were damaged, then those portions, those damaged portions of their brains could not be restored. But now there's new understanding of the brain, new knowledge of the brain, information about the brain has literally emerged out of the shadows. And neuroscientists now know that synaptic connections can reorganize themselves over time as needed. This phenomenon is referred to as neuroplasticity. And this process enables the brain to adapt, to learn, and to recover from injuries. So I want you to consider some of these stats when it comes to the power that's stored within the brain. A single DVD can hold 4.77 gigabytes of information, which equates to approximately 2,000 high definition photographs. That's a lot of information. That's a lot of data. But do you know how many DVDs it would take to store the estimated memory within the average human brain? If you took a stack of DVDs and stacked them one on top of the other, to equate the amount of memory that can be stored within the brain, that stack of DVDs would reach from Earth to the International Space Station. That's a distance of 254 miles. That's more than 330 million DVDs stacked end to end on top of each other, which would contain enough space to store 660 billion high definition photographs. So we store millions of gigabytes of data, of information within the brain, images, memories, lifetimes of knowledge that we've accumulated over throughout our education, skill sets, languages. All of this information is stored neatly and categorized neatly within this tiny little space within our brain. So modern technology requires warehouses to store the equipment to store this much information. Modern scientists are baffled as to how an organ so small could possibly hold such vast quantities of information. Modern scientists, traditional scientists, believe that all phenomena, including consciousness, can be explained solely in terms of physical matter and its interactions. Traditional scientists believe that consciousness, what we think and how we think, is a byproduct of physical processes, the activity of neural networks, along with other chemical processes within the brain, store information. But fortunately, there's a new breed of neuroscientists who believe that consciousness was not created by brain processes. There are those who believe that consciousness exists outside of the body and beyond the brain, and that people with exceptional talents, people with exceptional abilities, have the capacity to tap into an unlimited reservoir of knowledge that exists outside of the brain, outside of the body, but within our universe. There's a quote I want to share with you that I read maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and that has always stayed with me and is relevant to the conversation that we're going to have today. This quote says, and it's from John Anthony West's book, The Serpent in the Sky, the High Wisdom, the wisdom of ancient Egypt. And he says that the brain developed in order to receive and apprehend those aspects of universal consciousness necessary for a person to perform foreordained tasks. Just as a radio does not generate radio waves, but receives radio waves that are already there, the nature, the nature of consciousness determines the structure of the brain. So, in other words, our brain is a device that was designed in order to access information that is accessible beyond our physical being. So, we're going to talk about the brain today. We're going to talk about science and other mind expanding topics with my guest today, a brother who is truly qualified to talk about these subject matters, one of the most gifted persons that I know. His name is Hunter Havlin Adams the third. So Hunter, welcome to the Browder File Show, and it's good to see you, my friend. You're muted. You have to unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. Let me see that red slash arrow on your microphone go off so that we can bring you forward and begin our conversation. It's off. Hunter, welcome to the Browder File Show. How
Hey
you doing, my
man,
friend?
what's going on? Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Uh,
you what's going on, man? It's good to see you
hey,
again.
I'm sorry, man. Microsoft decided that they wanted to update Windows 11 as soon as I turned on my computer.
Yeah, but that's happened to me a couple of times, and it's not fun.
No,
But thank you. I'm glad you were able to get everything worked out, and I've been looking forward to having you on the show, man.
I've been
Because
looking forward to being here. I mean, this is the day before a very special day, which you are aware of, which we'll come to later on.
yeah, yes, indeed, indeed. And this day is special too because all this month I've been talking about the Nile Valley Conference that was held on the 26th through the 30th in 1984 at
Right.
at King's Chapel in Morehouse, and you were
Right,
one of the presenters at
right.
at the conference, and you talked about your topic dealt with science within the Nile Valley. And again, it just reinforced how much respect I have for you and your vast scope of knowledge on a number of topics. But you were just in DC a couple of weeks ago, attending a Black in Neuro Conference at UDC. Tell our listeners a little bit about that conference, why you were there, some of the people who were there, and some of the information that was shared during that event.
Yeah, it was a wonderful conference. Black in Neuro is a recently founded organization, founded in the aftermath of the sacrifice or murder of George Floyd, and we in 2020. And after that, a lot of things happened. A lot of our people began to realize and accept this is a hostile society to our existence, and that we need to find ways to come together to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, as Bob Marley would say. And so, Black and Neuro, a lot of Black organizations took profound stands at that time. Black physicists walked out of their jobs at University of Chicago, for example. A lot of things like that, because people are really fed up. And the irony is, given the current political, rhetorical climate, we're coming back to a similar time in that people are realizing that we really have to come together, but we have to come together around something. We have to come together around a shared social theory of life. That's really important. That's one of the things, as you well know, that's missing in all discussions about pyramids and temples of the Nile Valley, because those people, our ancestors, had to have a way of life, a social theory on how to organize, how to have pro social connectedness, right? That lasted for at least 3,000 years,
A
right?
minimum 3,000
And
years.
that was called, eventually was known as Maat. So I've been on a campaign for decades that we need to reimagine Maat or Mayat for today, for these circumstances. That, and I'm going to come to Black and Neuro in a second, because everything is not working.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter what religion you belong to, what faith tradition, what philosophy you hold, whether it's capitalism, socialism, Marxism, none of those things are working for us today, and even for everyone else, except
So
maybe
let me ask
some
you a
folks.
question, Hunter, before you continue. You mentioned the word Ma'at. Can you just give our listeners a brief overview of what Ma'at is, what those principles or concepts are, and why they were so important 5,000 years ago?
Very good. Ma'at, uh, Obinga has a lot of definitions. A lot of people have lots of definitions. And there's no single English word that it can be translated to. It could be translated as a philosophy of life. It could be translated as a way to do politics or ethics or morality, a moral ideal, something that you want to um, strive to maintain. Some even say that some or all of the Ten Commandments from the Hebrew tradition were derived from something called the Declarations of Innocence. And these were declarations that were said by an individual not only in his or her behalf at death, but during life, right? The text says, I do not murder, I do not lie, I do
Mhm.
not steal, and so forth and so on. Not thou shalt not.
Exactly. And that's an important distinction. It
A
means
very
that
important
people have
distinction.
been socialized to know that these are things that would not benefit the development of any society. So you were socialized to know that there are certain behaviors that are expected of you within a civilized nation. You didn't have to be commanded not to
Right.
do something, which implied that you didn't know that you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't commit adultery, you shouldn't murder and do those such things. So that's a very
Why is
important
that
distinction.
important, Tony? Because we've learned about Darwin and the survival of the fittest. No, all the research today says it was survival of the friendliest, survival of those who could get along. Because
Mm,
early on, 300,000 years ago, folks realized that they needed each other, and different groups had different skill sets depending upon where they were, the environment that they lived in. And so they learned to cooperate, not compete with one another.
sure,
So,
sure.
so Maat has a long genealogy going back 300,000 years. It just didn't pop up when 40 different kinship groups migrated to the Nile Valley after the Sahara dried up around 6,000 years ago. And so the thing is that why nothing is working, and I'll talk about the neuroscience of that, because we've never encountered an adversary like the one we've encountered since 1492 or 1452, whichever date
Hmm.
you want to use. So folks had ways that they engaged in conflict, engaged in war with other neighboring groups, but they had never seen an adversary as cunning, deceptive, callous as the one that came down from the north.
The Caucasus Mountains. And look, Hunter, I just want to let you know one of the benefits of knowing people like you and inviting you as guests on the show is that I bring in people who can establish that foundation. So a couple of weeks ago, I had Edwin Nichols on the show.
Oh,
So
my dear brother.
Nichols talked about axiological references and gave us a framework for which we could better understand what you're talking about today. So you're just adding to the knowledge that he's already shared with our listeners.
Yeah, Dr. Nichols, 94, 95. He
94
came
years
to,
old.
he came to my lecture down at Bethune-Cookman College with the Association of Black Psychologists convention, and I was terrified seeing him and Naeem Akbar sitting in my lecture because I knew I couldn't mess up. I had to get things right,
Absolutely. And I'm
and he
sure they were
enjoyed it.
pleased with your presentation, brother. I'm sure they were.
Right, he was very pleased, and then afterwards, we had some deep dialogue into the nature of intuition, because people think, oh, intuition must be a sixth sense. Well, human beings have between 34 and 50 identifiable senses, not just five that Aristotle said we had. That's where that came from.
So,
Five
Hunter,
senses.
I'm glad you qualified that with identifiable because it's my feeling that we've got probably hundreds of senses that were used by our ancestors thousands of years ago that we know nothing about, and as a consequence, as a result of the lack of the absence of that knowledge, we're now struggling to do basic things that human beings during so-called primitive times were able to do with ease.
Right,
We've
and
lost
that's
so much.
that's but coming back to Black and Neuro, it was a great conference. I would say 60% of the people there were graduate students. So you had a chance to engage students and what they know. And, when I said I do cultural neuroscience, they say, huh? What
What
is
is cultural
what
neuroscience,
is
Hunter?
cultural neuroscience? Most neuroscientists don't know. No matter
Hmm.
what degrees they have, they've never heard of that, because with any of the scientific fields, you tend to get pigeonholed into a very specific and narrow area, and that's your focus. So, the broader picture, if you don't have any interest in learning what that is, or if you don't have a professor or an advisor sharing that information with you, you don't know. But people know about social neuroscience, the study of the neuroscience of social interactions. Cultural neuroscience is the study of how culture influences how our brain functions, how we make decisions, how we perceive. And I
So give me
use,
some examples, Hunter.
yeah,
We're talking concepts. But give me some practical
right.
examples of
Quick
what you're talking
example.
about.
Okay, if you have two children raised in the rainforest of the Cameroon, all they see is beautiful greenery. They hear a panoply of different sounds from insects, birds, elephants, other things. But if you take two children who are raised in Saudi Arabia, basically all they see is sun and sand. They don't hear the same way. They don't see the same way.
Mhm.
If you take two children who grow up in Indonesia on one of those islands, their homes are on stilts, but they can learn how to hold their breath for maybe 5 minutes underwater, right? So their entire physiology has adapted to that environment and the tasks that they're trying to accomplish. But if you take those children from Indonesia, bring them to Saudi Arabia, they won't have a clue. It'll take them months for their entire nervous system to adapt to that new environment. Same way, this is the last thing, if you take those two children and let them go up to the Himalayas, they
Mhm.
lived in the rainforest, the temperature change, the lack of oxygen, the not the lack, but less oxygen in the higher mountains, their
The
whole
thinner air.
physiology has to change. The last thing, when you see sisters walking in Ghana or Ethiopia with baskets on their head balancing, right? Their whole sense of balance has changed to be more fine tuned. But I bet you $1 to a donut hole that a sister in Washington, D.C. couldn't walk down the street with a basket on top of her head because her whole rhythmicity has changed towards the environment that she's in. That's cultural neuroscience. It affects how people make decisions, how they express their emotions. Some people in Italy may laugh at one thing, but if they're in Mexico and they laugh, people look at them, huh? What's wrong with them? So that's cultural neuroscience, and it's a relative, maybe a decade or so old specialty field in
Mm.
neuroscience. And
So
so,
I was going to ask you, give me some of your takeaways from this Black in Neuro conference at UDC. One thing that I recall you sharing with me that really didn't surprise me is the fact that over 90% of the attendees were females, African American females. So the brothers were just not there in any sufficient numbers, huh?
right, and sadly, that's the case for academia at large, and not
Yes.
just for our people. Men just aren't interested broadly in this country in higher education pursuits. And I think a lot of their disinclination is due to the music,
Mm.
right? That the music is organizing their physiology such that the immediacy of reward from the music, of feeling the bass and everything, um, makes them not want to pursue that. They want to be in the more emotional state as women, were accorded to before. So that's something that we really have, plus a lot of Black men don't see the need. Why am I going to go get a master's degree? What is it going to do to me and I do for me? I can't get a job. That's partially true, depending upon what it is that interests you. But it should be beyond just going to get a degree. We should be lifelong learners, learning
Absolutely.
something new every day to benefit us. For
So
example,
let me ask
just a
before you
second.
jump into Well, look,
Just
hold on.
one
It's the
second.
bottom of the hour. I want to let folk know that you're listening to WPFW, you're listening to the Browder Files show, and you're listening to my guest, Hunter Adams. All right, Hunter, take it away.
Okay, I was on the bus a month ago, and I was about to get off at my stop in Chicago at the L station, and I noticed this brother had a tattoo on his left arm, and it was Yasir or Osiris.
Mhm.
And so before I got off, I said, "Hey man, do you know what that means?" He said, "Oh yeah, it's Osiris, you know, the one who resurrected." I said,
Mm,
"Okay." I said,
okay.
"But it's more than that because he was black." I said, "He represents a state of consciousness called the perfect black." Kim Ware. He said, "Huh?" It's just an average guy. He said, "Where you find that out?" I said, "Well, you know, you do some work, you can find out more." But it was a state of consciousness that was the highest level that initiates sought. And there's references to that. Now, if I have time, I can share a couple.
Okay.
Uh, that, in fact, there's a psychedelic called 5-MeO DMT, right? It gives someone the perfect black experience
Now, what
within.
does that mean? What is a perfect black experience? You get pulled
That
over by
means
the cops or?
the perfect black means that's a state of quiescence, that
Mm,
there's no mind, there's no time, there's
mm,
no space, there's no boundaries, there's infinity, but you are aware of all those things absence.
mhm.
So you're witnessing that. It's not just your mind goes blank, right? But it's an intentional thing that you can accomplish with many years of meditation.
So let me ask you this, Hunter. Based on that response, your mind doesn't just go blank, as you say. My contention is your mind taps into what our dear friend Richard King said, described as the collective unconsciousness, the source of knowledge, and that then allows you to access other ways of knowing, other senses, like the multiple senses that we were talking about earlier. Is that something that science has begun to acknowledge, or is it still considered one of those woo-woo topics?
There's look, uh, there's 200 theories of consciousness currently.
Okay.
200 theories of consciousness, right? 95% of them are materialistically based,
Okay.
right? But that's, since Rene Descartes, everything has got to have a physical basis. But from my studies, quote, consciousness, not awareness, because people use the words interchangeably. Awareness, being aware of yourself, aware of your surrounding, I'm conscious of, but consciousness as a quality feeling of existence, that's different. And so there's no materialistic basis. You can't reduce down neurons firing down to the quality of existence. That's the problem with AI. And I'll say a word about the sister who talked about AI, and it was terrifying. Her talk was terrifying. When
So Hunter,
we
let's do this. I do want you to talk about that sister, and then I want to pivot and have us talk about another sister, Dr. Patricia
Okay,
Newton, her
okay,
work, your relationship with her, and an upcoming event this coming Sunday. So yeah, give us the highlight of the sister who presented at the conference. I believe you said she was Ethiopian and she
right.
used to work at Google.
She worked at Google. Her name is Dr. Timet um, Gerber. I may be mispronouncing her name, but I can provide that with you. But she was fired because she was working on Google's Deep Mind project on the ethics of it. And she uncovered a whole range of ethical concerns that at that time Google and other companies did not want to pursue. And so from her study, she took the audience back to the beginnings of eugenics, because
Hmm.
all AI systems are aiming for what they call artificial general intelligence, AGI, artificial general intelligence. And that is systems that can mimic the intelligence of collective human brains, right? That's what they're aiming to do. And so there's many different themes of AGI. Different companies have different brand names that they're using to brand their particular one. But one of the things that stand out is something that a guy named Ray Kurzweil, some years ago, one of the inventors or of the synthesizer, not the first one, that was Robert Moog, which Sun Ra
The Moog
played,
synthesizer.
right? He gave the first one to Sun Ra to play to test out, by the way, as an aside. But Ray Kurzweil said we are entering or have entered the age of spiritual machines, right? That's an oxymoron, right? Some
Hmm.
years ago. And we are approaching the singularity when there will be a merger with humans and machines, a philosophy called transhumanism,
Yeah.
right? And that's coming within 5 years now.
Yeah,
This is
we've had
what they,
conversations about that, and you talked before about the dangers of that,
right.
by having the danger of having people like Elon Musk and these racist technocrats who don't
Peter Thiel.
care, and Peter Thiel, who care more about machines than they do about human beings.
No, 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 no. Yes, but underlying that is eugenics.
Okay,
It's a
so
cover for eugenics 2.0 like we've never seen before. That's what she laid out
hmm,
in her presentation at the Black and Neuro Conference. She gave the history of the eugenics movement, right, and showed how it has infiltrated all of these Silicon Valley guys, and their terms, transhumanism, cosmosism, are just covers for their eugenic ideology and grand idea. So most people have never heard of this before because they haven't been in it like this sister was. And so that was the most disturbing thing when she gave the data, when she did the tracking back of ideas back to the 1920s of eugenics. So people talk about, quote, white supremacy, and I've always had problems with that term
hmm.
that was invented in 1854. But AGI is a cover for the new, quote, white supremacy, the new eugenics ideology.
And at its root, Hunter, what does that look like? How does that impact the lives of people of African ancestry? This new eugenics movement 2.0, as you called it.
Well, it says that, they had the celebration for the guy who was shot, I won't call his name, and killed
Hmm.
as the second coming of Christ, where people, NPR had pictures of people carrying crosses with his name on it,
Yeah, I
right, and
saw.
stuff. What an illusion. They're so delusional in believing that. And so their idea is that we should not exist. That's the challenge. And so whoever comes up with a better understanding of consciousness, that will set the tone, the philosophy for this new eugenics movement, AGI.
Okay.
That's
So look,
why,
let's do this. I want to do this because the time is going to get away from us, and I do want us to devote a respectable amount of time to your colleague, my colleague, my dear friend, Dr. Patricia Newton, who passed away 5 years ago this coming Sunday on the 28th of September. You and Dr. Newton was a psychiatrist who'd done a lot of work on the brain, on human behavior. You all did a lot of work together. Can you tell us a bit about the work that you did with Dr. Newton and why her memory is so important for us to consider as we commemorate the fifth anniversary of her ascension into ancestorhood?
Dr. Patricia Ann Newton, as some people called her, a transcultural forensic psychiatrist, was the psychiatrist. So
Oh,
when psychiatrists had issues that they were trying to contend with, they gave her a call,
yeah.
including our dearly beloved Dr. Frances Cress Welsing as an example. That's the level which she operated at. Uh, and she was so much like ancestor Dr. Bobby E. Wright,
Mm.
clinical psychologist, who told us in 1974, 1980, 1974, warning us about the psychopathic racial personality, right? 12%, Tony, of the CEOs of American countries are psychopaths.
Now, what do you mean by that? How can he make that statement? Give me some evidence to back that up, Hunter.
Oh, I can't give you the quote right now, but off the top of my head, but there's been studies, a recent study of CEOs of the United States by a sociologist, and that's what they discovered. But I can give you
So
the
they
rest.
care more about the bottom line, dollars and cents, than they care
Know
about
that
human
they
beings.
care more about themselves. They're extreme narcissists. They have no feelings for anyone other than themselves and those closest to them, as long as they can be used by them, right?
Sounds like you're talking about the CEO of the United States of America, my friend.
Well, he's been called that by other psychiatrists. But
Hmm.
so um, Patricia Ann Newton was an amazing woman. This woman was an international meeting planner. She would plan meetings in Hong Kong and Romania. Right after Romania was bombed during that war, she went there and arranged meetings to help them deal with their trauma, right? Because she was a specialist in trauma. Uh, now the better term, rather than post traumatic slavery disorder, that was what she came up with, is social epigenetic trauma, because that's very specific on how specific changes in our DNA are affected by social events previous generations, 10 or 20 generations ago. And I don't have time to go into that, but just think about a butterfly. I use the butterfly analysis that each generation butterflies know that they got to fly from Chicago to Mexico to mate, even
Every
though
year. Hmm.
every year, like
Hmm.
clockwork. How do they know that when their entire exoskeleton of the caterpillar was dissolved and was in mush? But somehow the code of what it needed to do when it came out of that chrysalis was still there. And so when Dr. Newton was talking about post traumatic slavery disorder of behaviors, mental routines that so many of our people engaged in, that's an inheritance. But at the same time, the perpetrators have inherited or continually reproduced the violent patterns. So that's why Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, all of them, what do they have mostly on their shows? Murders. They're continuing their murderous um, pathogenesis from the time when they were called Yamnaya people, right? You can just look up Yamnaya,
So
Yamnaya.
give the
Just
definition. You talked about that a couple of weeks ago. So give the definition, and then I want to put a pause on that for a minute. I've got another guest I want to come on briefly to talk about an event this Sunday as well. So who are the Naya people?
the Yamnaya, according to recent archaeological research, were an ancestral European populations from the Balkan areas, pre-Slavic people who were worse than the Vikings in terms of how they murdered and rampaged and raped and pillaged and all of that. So
Okay.
that's history, um, 6,000 years ago. And
Okay.
so they went all over Europe. And so current people who classify themselves as European, many of them contain a percentage of their quote genes. And so those behaviors that they had can be reenacted in similar contexts.
Okay. Well,
So
Hunter,
folks can look that up.
let's put a pin on this conversation for a minute. I want to invite Mama McKinney and Brother Kalechi to come on for a few minutes and share details about this Sunday's Founders Day event of Appeal. So, Mama McKinney, I see you here. I see you're present. Can you unmute yourself and share with our listeners the activities this Sunday with Founders Day? What is Founders Day? What is Appeal? And who is the founder of Appeal?
All right. Well, good afternoon, Brother Karak, and good afternoon, Professor Hunter. Good to hear the information that you just presented. I'm also here with the Executive Director of Appeal, Kelechi Egwim, Dr. Kelechi.
Greetings.
Um,
Greetings, brother.
and Founders Day. First of all, who and what is Appeal? So, Appeal is the Association for People of Pan African Economic Advancement Through Leverage, Inc. And that organization was founded by, I will have to say, our beloved founder, who is now an ancestor, Lasana K. Mack. Baba Lasana put a lot of effort and time into Appeal, and it just fell right in line with what he was doing somewhat on a full-time basis. He was a financial person, and the actual goal of Appeal is to develop and begin start of a credit union for that is a Pan-African base for African people wherever we are. It would, of course, initially be national. So Founders Day is held the last Sunday of every September, which is always near Baba Lasana's birthday. It is our annual fundraising event. It is our most lucrative fundraising event. And it's a semi-formal African wear, African attire party, which is more than just a party. Again, it's fundraiser. We also have an auction. We also have performers. We also, of course, celebrate the various parts of Appeal. We celebrate the progress we've made over the year. We celebrate our ancestors. We have great food, and there are still tickets available. So it will be held on Sunday. Doors open at 3. The event starts at 4 at the Thurgood Marshall Center, 1816 12th Street Northwest.
Very
And
good.
it's
So, Baba,
also it's a hybrid program as well. So even if
For
you're not
that.
able to be there in person, you can join us virtually. And we're not talking about live streaming. This is an actual interactive virtual platform. So even if you can't be there in person, you will be able to fully participate in all the activities except for the food, obviously. If you can't do that just yet.
yeah.
But yeah, so it's an opportunity for folks to party with a purpose, and be part of the broader mission of Appeal that Mama McKinney just talked about. We have several platforms towards that mission, including Black Saturday Co-op, the think tank, the literacy workshop series, the historical literacy one that Mama McKinney heads up that committee, financial literacy, so many other things that Appeal does as part of this fundraiser allows us to move towards our greater goals. All the resources for this particular fundraiser goes towards the establishment of that first national Black credit union, which is one of the key platforms of appeal.
Okay. So can I ask you before I let you go, because I've got to finish up with Hunter and then finish up my show. Can you give a telephone number and a email address where people can get additional information about this Sunday's activities and the ongoing activities of appeal?
Absolutely. That part is easy. There's really a one-stop shop when it comes to appeal, which is our website. You go to appealinc.org. You get all the information, about the program. You can click right onto it. You can get your tickets, and you can also find out more information about appeal. But the central, one-stop shop place to get information about appeal is appealinc.org. We do, of course, have email address. The best email address is info@appeal.org. So if you have a question, you can just send an email to info@appealinc.org, and somebody will definitely get back to you. We also we do also have a 800 number, and the 800 number is let me see if I can remember it.
I have it.
1-800.
I'm looking at it. It's 800-771-78.
711.
800-7. Okay, 711-7851. Okay, I had to put my
Okay.
glasses on better. So that's
No problem.
appeal inc.org. So
Okay.
come out and join us. Music presented by Sahel. We have other performers, including Brother Bomani Arma, Anna Malago, and Brother Kaba, who is, of
The
course,
Kaba from WPFW. Yes, indeed.
WPFW. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, look, I want to thank you all for coming on and answering a frantic appeal that I put out to you all about 50 minutes ago. But thank you so much. Let me move on so I can wrap up with Hunter Adams, and I will see you all Sunday afternoon. Okay. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank you, brother. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Peace. Peace. So, Hunter, in the few remaining minutes that we have, I want to spend a bit more time talking about your relationship with Dr. Patricia Newton, who was also known to us as Sekhmet. Charles Finch was very close to Sister Sekhmet and always speak very lovingly of her. So, can you share just a bit about the work that you're doing to continue the legacy of our dear sister, Dr. Patricia Newton?
Yes, we collaborate on many different projects, retreats, seminars, workshops in different countries. One of the last things we did was the Secrets of Consciousness conference in Baltimore, and that was really amazing. Even Dick Gregory showed up.
Mhm.
Surprisingly,
Mhm.
Martin Luther King the
The
third
third was
showed,
there. Yes, indeed. And
right?
even
And
even our
people,
dear friend Richard King was there. That was my last time
right,
seeing Richard. Yes.
right. It was amazing because we were looking at the questions that you posed initially.
Mm-hmm.
And from Dr. Newton's 5,000 clinical cases of people from all walks of life, all ethnicities, all professions, no profession, and also from her being immersed into three different African healing traditions among the Yoruba, the Asante, and the Wolof, and also a student of Kemetic medicine or ancient
Absolutely.
Egyptian medicine, and particularly the nature known as Sekhmet. She embodied Sekhmet as a healing, quote, nature or goddess, and a warrior goddess simultaneously. And from that skill set, she attempted to build a medical school in Ghana, actually did build it,
Sure.
that merged traditional medicine and Western medicine. But unfortunately, she made a transition suddenly 5 years ago, and her medical school was sold to the Presbyterian Church.
Yeah.
But the
So
last
look,
thing,
there's a sister, Ismira, who worked close with Met, who is
right,
trying to remedy that situation. But
right.
look, Hunter, our time is just about up. I'm going to have you back so that we can continue our conversation about the brain, about consciousness. I didn't get a chance to ask you about epigenetics in more detail. I didn't get a chance to ask you about the red nucleus. So we are going to have you back, and we'll
And the
do a deeper
mosaic
dive.
self model. That's one of the most important things that we worked on together, because the
Okay.
self is not a thing, it's not an illusion, it's a process that develops throughout our entire life.
And that was something that you presented at the recent Blacks in Neuro Conference, correct?
Right. And the Black psychologist, and it appears that I'll be traveling overseas to present the same thing, and I'll hold that for the next time.
Okay, great. Well, look, we're going to have you back, and we also need to discuss your forthcoming book. But Hunter, my friend, thank you so much for joining us today on
Thank
the
you
Browder
for
File
inviting
Show.
me.
Oh, you're welcome, my brother. You're welcome, quite welcome. And so I want to thank all you listeners for just sharing with me your response to the shows and the guests that we've had on the show. This past Sunday was the 21st of September, and of course, I received texts and emails from everybody who wanted to inform me that Earth, Wind, and Fire was going to be performing before the some television program that was going on, and they were acknowledging Earth, Wind, and Fire for 50 plus years of music, for creating a song that has captured the hearts and the memories of so many people. That's Do You Remember the 21st Night of September? So it's great to see that my group was honored on the day that represented the song that's so important to all of us. So that's why I leave you with Maurice White, reminding you that it's all about love. This is Tony Browder, thanking you for listening to the Browder File Show and asking you to tune in to Sojourner Truth coming up next at 6 o'clock. This is Tony Browder, and I'll see you next week. Peace.